Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Logia Luffy, Yami Edition, by Wolvenstrom. A little mix-up in produce results in a traitorous man with a mouth full of rubber, and a happy-go-lucky boy with a darker edge to him. Possibly Luffy/Boa. Big shout out to the warlords of this channel. Native Warrior, Claude Lifrayes, Neo Esker 23, Derek Dowdy, Zazu Zayaz, Abdul Rauf Ali, In3WT, What If Lord, Black Money Young Leon, Garrick Russell, Case Clark, KSGP L4YZ, Brian McKenzie. You know who you are. Want to stand with them? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
He would love to say that he had never been in a situation like this before, but he'd be lying. Sawtooth Arlong was quite undeniably the strongest known pirate in East Ocean. That is the strongest that actually bothered to do his pirating here instead of buggering off to the Grand Line like every other suicidal fool. It had been child's play for him to reap the spoils of this sea even with the pathetic marine presence. Rivals? What rivals? The only thing left from his last clash with another pirate was a bleach-white toothpick that he used to clean the rest of the idiot from his mouth. The Marines? Grease a few palms and you have yourself a brightly dressed mook ready to cut his own throat for paper. He was unmatched here. Anywhere else was a different story. He was weak. His ego wouldn't let him admit it outright, but compared to Jinbei or the great Fisher Tiger he was nothing. Unable and unwilling to learn the time-consuming practices of fishman karate. He earned notoriety by being as immoral and cruel as not exactly humanly possible. Not wanting to risk any challengers elsewhere, he turned towards the world government's shining example of peace, where the former runt of proverbial school was able to run rampant unopposed. That is until a few hours ago when he'd had his scaly ass handed to him by a boy not even a month out to sea yet. Then when he thought he'd gotten away from that monster, he found himself in the situation he was in, feeling just as bad as he did under Jinbei. The fingers pressing against the sides of his head felt as though they could poke through his skull like meringue. Every last ounce of his incredible strength had abandoned him and he couldn't muster the energy to swat the filthy human holding him away, his bored brown eyes staring down Arlong's ugly yellow ones. So from the beginning, if you'd be so kind. He wanted to snarl, to rip the human's face off, to stick his hand down the redhead's throat and tear out his intestines to choke him with. He wanted to commit so many sadistic acts of mutilation that it would make Hostel look like the Care Bears. He wanted to do all these things, but could do nothing but humor the men and regale him with his life before it had been locked in an iron grip. It started when my navigator returned from her last voyage. For the sake of all of us, I'm not going to call this a flashback, because the entire chapter is a flashback. Lord Arlong. Nami has returned from her expedition. A sickly yellow man thing said in a voice like he was trying to speak through a mouthful of pudding, somehow sounding nothing but utterly respectful to the abomination he was addressing. Sawtooth Arlong was by far more menacing than any other fishman on his crew. Granted, he was also the least ridiculous looking once you got past the pointy nose, but he was also bigger and definitely much stronger than his men. The razor-sharp teeth didn't hurt either, unless you were human, then they hurt a lot. He gestured for them to allow her entry, leaning back in his throne and grinning sinisterly when the human knelt before him. Nami, he said jovially, you were gone for quite some time. I trust the trip was profitable? Another advantage of being a fishman that other species scarily realized was how powerful the senses of some subspecies were. Most wouldn't have noticed the minute flinch she made at his question. She nodded. Yeah, it was. Fooling a few men is all too easy. Some men. Her captain corrected her, looking over her disgusting human form with disdain, and smacking the guy seated next to him across the back of the head for leering. I kept the loot on the boat. It isn't much, but they weren't exactly long-time sailors. She raised her arms above her head and let out a deep yawn. Arlong's hand flashed out several more times at his less xenophobic men. If we're all done here, Lord Arlong, can I go? A girl needs her beauty rest, right boys? She winked at a manta man who had to fight a blush that would get his head put through the floor if the needle-nosed shark saw it. He grunted and waved towards the park exit, which the girl took, instantly closing the gate behind her. He snorted. Stupid human honestly thought she was smarter than him. Oh well, he'd learn her soon enough. Just like he was going to learn his men now. Lord Arlong no. Elsewhere, while Arlong was schooling his crew about humans, Jin was schooling his captain on fishmen just as painfully. I'm telling you kid, this is nothing short of suicidal. No one, not even the Don, has ever got within a mile of the Fishman Pirates Island base. Jin said slowly and clearly. He had a nagging headache that he dearly hoped was the result of a breath of poison. At least then he'd know it would eventually stop. Luffy wasn't listening, of course. He was too busy stuffing his face with what little Sanji was able to cook with the rations they had gotten. Not that he'd be any better at listening if he wasn't cramming crab cakes down his throat. The other crew members, however, knew exactly what they were in for. More than half of their unwilling initiates had turned tail and ran, or rather swam for it. Rather braving the dangers of the sea than what was to come. The few brave ones who remained were actually those who hadn't been smart enough to evade Jin's eyes. What's the asterisk smack big deal? I thought Krieg was hacked the big boss round here. The human black hole said flippantly between bites. HRRMMM. No, I said he was strongest, active pirate in this sea. Arlong came here from the Grand Line to the island we're headed to a decade ago and hasn't been seen since. The fishmen take down every ship that gets too close. If you didn't get close, then how do you know it was fishmen? Maybe it's just sea kings in the area, said Sanji. Do sea kings drag boat with them? Occasionally? Above the water while screaming, another victory for Lord Arlong. Let's see what booty on this wreck. Loud enough to be heard from miles around? Okay, you win. So they're tough, Luffy said around the fingers he was licking clean. Yes, he shouted. He took a deep breath and gave it one more try. Fishmen are like Zoan-type devil fruit users, stronger, faster and more powerful than any one man could ever hope to be without any of the weaknesses a fruit brings. Not to mention their leader Arlong was said to have been kicked out of his old crew when his captain Jinbei became a Shinichibukai because he was too dangerous and bigoted against humans to keep around. A Shiwichi what now? Asked Sanji stupidly. Oh, you mean the 7 privateers that work for the Marines? Sanji and Jin eyeballed him strangely but decided not to say anything. Trying to figure out if their captain was smart or stupid was probably a bigger task than finding the fabled treasure of Gold Roger. Sanji spoke up first. So why would Nami be going to this Arlong Island if he didn't like people? Jin shrugged before flinching at the painful series of pops and cracking noises that went up and down his back. No idea. All I know is that she there along with your boat, money and 4 other crew members. Right, so we go to Arlong Island. Fry up some fishmen and get our navigator back. Lu. Sanji shook his head side to side very slowly. Jin put his head back into his hands. Hey Sanji, look. I drew a fishman. The dark teen held up a picture like a 4-year-old's Magnus Opam. Sanji laughed hysterically, but not because of the drawing. It had been rather a simple plan. When Yosaku had told them that the traitorous navigator was heading to an island ruled by a fishman, he knew flexing their power at them would only get them sent to the bottom of the sea. It was a good thing that he was a genius then. It was also good that the ship had quite a bit of spare rope lying about. They'd tied up Zoro, which they would never have been able to do if he wasn't almost half dead at the moment, and sailed towards the island. Usopp had heard all about the swordsman's escapades before meeting him, so he was bound to be considered a threat in Dice natives. Hopefully he could use this to barter his way onto the island and have a look around. One of those things had a tattoo of a man with his head sitting at his feet with a large red X crossed over him. He sailed right past the docks and with the strength of cowardice dragged the anchor he had just weighed back up. Unfortunately the fishmen followed after them. Even after he, Johnny and Yosaku abandoned the crippled warrior, they still followed. Through the sea, up the shore, through a bizarre upside-down town until he was met with a very nearsighted child. Don't touch that fishman. A feminine hand whacked the boy overhead, making him lose grip on the ship's sword he had been holding. She knelt down and consoled him just as tears stared pooling in his eyes. Giving Usopp a good look, or gawk, at her. She looked nothing like her. She had purple hair in a slightly different style, a tan and muscles on her arm showing she worked outside. A very pretty face, was a few inches taller and a bit more developed than his quarry. So why did he get the same vibe of her that he did from Nami? Look closely, Chabo. She pointed up at Usopp with a bewildered look. He may have a freakishly long nose like Arlong. Freakish, but beyond that he's human, maybe. Maybe, come back here you little runt. The angry yell reminded Usopp that he had a well-fed flounder chasing after him. His coward instinct told him to run, but his newly forming warrior instinct ran up to coward, kicked it in the nuts and heat-butted it out cold. He grabbed a blue-gray pellet from one of his ammo stashes and pulled back his slingshot. I won't let you trample these innocent people, die you son of a. He didn't get to finish as an all-consuming pain erupted in the back of his skull, sending him to the ground unconscious. The rhythmic throbbing in his skull was like an inbuilt alarm clock telling him to get up. Pulling himself into a sitting position, he realized he was laying on top of a rather worn mattress in the corner of a rather worn house. The furniture looked sturdy but aged, like whoever owned it didn't take much care of it very well. The curtains only had a few holes in it, and as he stepped on the floor the boards creaked like in those old haunted houses. "Good you're awake." A familiar female voice spoke. The woman sat down at the table along with the boy from before. Fruit salad and orange juice for three sat on it, which reminded him that mortal terror always left him a tad hungry. "Sorry if this doesn't fill you up, but it's all we can get," the girl said, not without a hint of bitterness. He smiled reassuringly and dug in, idly rubbing his still aching skull. "You did a pretty stupid thing attacking a fishman like that," she said, the smile melting from her face into a condescending smirk. Her words jogged his short-term memory. "Hey, that's right. Why the heck did you hit me? Don't you realize I was trying to protect you?" She snorted, "You look like you could barely protect yourself, let alone me and Chabo." She pointed to the boy, and before Usopp could sputter two words she continued, "Besides, if you as much as tried to fight him we all would have been dead." "That's your opinion. I think that the great Captain Usopp could manage an overfed flounder like that guy. I wasn't talking about him." At the confused look she explained. "Meanwhile, and no, I'm not moving away just because I'm lazy. It's 3 in the goddamn morning and someone close by religiously believes their stereo only has one setting. I'm looking for a woman. Red hair, carrying a staff, eyes shaped like belly signs when she gets near anything over 1,000,000. You seen her?" Arlong wasn't known for his love of humans, but it was akin to a dog person not being fond of cats. He at least tolerated them until they did something to provoke him. The dead make no stones and all that metaphorical crap. Yet he'd never met a human who he'd wanted to kill Bo badly and in so short a time after meeting them. Zoro sat in front of the island ruler, tied up the best someone with 6 arms can. The human addressed him casually and without the slightest hint of fear on his face, as though he were talking to an equal rather than his born superior. He took a deep breath and regarded the swordsman with a sneer. "Don't talk to your betters so casually, human." The other fishmen gathered paled when the moss-headed teen snorted. "A tuna-breathed half-fish like you, my better? Yeah, right." Rather than rampage as he was so prone to doing, Arlong's sneer became a very toothy grin. He cracked the knuckles on his right hand loudly enough to make his comrades wince slightly and held up a single digit. "Once, I'll let that slide once. But call me or any of us half-fish again and I'll hang you from the top of the park by your guts." "What? I only said it because I thought you wouldn't like to be reminded that you're also half-who." He was cut off when a webbed hand wrapped itself around his throat. "We are not half-human," he roared in the swordless swordsman's face, slowly tightening his grip. "Our superior evolution has left we fishmen as distantly related to humans as geckos are related to dragons." He put a second hand around the throat when the human didn't start gasping and turning red. "We are in every way your betters. We are the chosen race to dominate this world. To fight us is to fight the very will of the gods. It never ceases to amaze me how much more full of yourself you get each time I return Arlong." The shark let his kill go, dropping him like a sack of potatoes, and turned to face the person exiting the building, letting Zoro secretly gasp for air without ruining his image. "You're different, Nami. Your map-making skills outshine even the greatest of our homeland scholars." He could feel her roll her eyes in her mind. Maybe if they bothered to include the land details instead of just mapping the sea they'd do better. She walked past him and bent down to meet eye to eye with her former crewmate. "You're even dumber than I gave you credit for. What kind of Nimrod sails to an island with a marine warning on it?" Her lord's interest peaked. "You know this human?" He replied in the negative. Just another perv, I pouted and sniffled out of his money. She winked in the direction of the manta hybrid again, whose immediate reaction was to belt himself in the face as hard as he could before Arlong saw the blush. Ha ha ha, Nami, you really are something else. Playing with a mon's heart so casually. You really are just a frigid witch woman. Her breath hitched for a moment, something any warrior in training would notice. He turned his gaze back to Arlong, who by now was sitting down again. He briefly contemplated getting a little payback, but guessed there would be nothing little about payback if he got it through them. You aren't kidding. First time I saw her I felt dirty. Like she'd kill me the first chance she got. Just my luck I'm a sucker for a nice R. He sucked the rest of the word back in before her stare killed him. You are so lucky that I hate getting blood on me, she said evenly. Now get off this island before I sick one of these goons on you. Shrug, if you insist. He crouched and with one spring fell back into Arlong pool, hands still tied to his sides. She was in motion before the water settled. Before the chatter of bafflement was heard and Arlong's command to let him die filtered through to his brain. Her fingers were half submerged in the water before she thought, what the hell am I doing? She managed to catch him while he sank like a stone in the deceptively deep pool, dragging him up to the surface and throwing him up like a garbage bag. What the hell did you think you were doing? She said angrily. Me? What kind of heartless witch woman save an injured man from drowning? She looked around. All her cohorts murmuring to each other suspiciously. Arlong himself steppling his fingers and leaning forward expecting a good answer with a mad glimmer in his eye. She turned back to Zoro, the kind that doesn't like to. Arlong's eyes narrowed, unless she's the one doing it. Whack. Og. He bit into the sides of his cheeks hard enough to draw blood when the staff his biggest hardly healed scar dead on. She grinned maliciously while continuing to increase the pressure, grinding into the wounds slowly and methodically. Red seeping through the bandages. She lifted her staff after a few more slowed twists and turned back to Arlong, who was once more leaning back in his seat. You had me worried for a second, girl. Wouldn't want to go back to how it was, would you? She smirked. Forget about it. Arlong. Lord Arlong. A fat fish came barreling through the gates to trip at his leader's feet. Get up, he said exasperatedly. I'm sorry, Lord Arlong, but the long-nosed human escaped me. Oh, and how did that happen? He grabbed the sides of his head. It was incredible. He was as quick on his feet as we are in water. He was gone mere moments after I chased him. Did you see what direction he was headed? Kokoyashi, I think. Arlong grinned. Perfect. I've got business there today anyway. He stood up. Oh, and comrade. Yes, Lord Arlong. You still have some cake on your lips. He wiped his mouth on his arm, leaving a pink trail. Oh. Thank you. Wait, I can X. Shunk Arlong addressed his remaining warriors. Move out to Cocoyashi. The fishmen all at once dived into the water, moving as blurs the second they did, and were half a quarter league out before the humans could take a breath. When all but one was in the water, Arlong grabbed him before he could join the rest. Not you. The man, those lips protruded a good few inches from his face, did what one could only imagine was biting them, if his teeth were not back in his skull. Why? He pointed to the mess he made. Clean this up. But Arlong, I'm not a. Clean it up, he said more authoritatively, then tell Hatchin to get started on lunch. I want the sushi ready before we get back, he decreed, and dived into the pool, gone before his marksman could say one syllable. The puckerfish sighed. Staring down at the whimpering body, he reached to pick it up, but almost immediately had a better idea. Girl, tell Hatchin to move this mess. I'm gonna take a long shortcut. She waved him off. You got it. Letting him leave the park on foot, whistling a Gonti tune that sounds like it's being played on a kazoo. Sighing, she lifted her foot from Zoro's face, reaching to the small of her back and pulling out a small knife to cut his meager bindings. Get up and get out. What? I'm in. Listen to me. She grabbed his shoulders and shook him violently. You have to escape before Arlong comes back, all right? If you're here where he returns, you're going to get killed. And where are you headed? Home. I'm going home. In a quiet little village things were, well, quiet. Not a single footstep was heard. The pleasant chatter of people shopping was gone. The wind blew through the trees. Store signs swayed back and forth gently, and if anyone were to listen hard enough they would hear a faint sound barely raising over the wind. Clack 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 clack. In the all but deserted streets a lone man sat at a table outside a tavern reading a book. Dressed like a man who didn't own a boat but liked to act like he did, with the key difference being the pinwheel he had sprouting out of his skipper's cap. Scars crisscrossed his body like a jigsaw puzzle. Not a very expensive one, more like one you'd give to a 7-year-old to keep them away from video games for a while you try to beat their high scores in the next room. A bushy black soup strainer twitched every now and then when he got to a particularly interesting part. Hello, human. A pointy shadow loomed over his page like a serrated bookmark telling him it might be time to stop reading. Arlong. Kokoyashi village leader Genzo replied dryly, flipping to the next page. I got some interesting stories about you, Pachi. The massive half-breed rested his webbed fingers in the space between Genzo's arms. Stories that say you have a weapon in your house. Yep. He tilted his head to keep reading, only to have Arlong other hand turn his head to face him. I thought I made myself clear when I let them sew you back together that it's forbidden for you inferior life forms to have weapons. I did make myself clear, didn't I? His grip slowly tightened on Genzo's skull. Men has to eat, Arlong. Can't hunt without a gun. Can't gut fish without a knife. Weapons give people ideas. He snarled through his razor teeth. Ideas make a pygmy think he's a giant. But guess what, human? You're still just a dwarf. It's just an old hunting sword. It's too dull to cut bread, let alone be used in a fight. The old man said tiredly. Right before he was pulled from his seat. The grip on his face had been lowered to a grip round his neck. At least the fish smell is a little better, he thought. If he was gonna die he may as well do it snarking. I don't care if it's a toy flintlock that shoots cork, any human owning a weapon will be seen as a rebel, and you know what I do to rebels, Genzo. Fortunately not all fishmen are known for their extra senses. They never noticed a pair of heads peeking out from behind a nearby house. Is he really just going to kill him for owning an old sword? Usopp asked, hardly believing his ears. Nojiko, Nami's sister-in-law but blood bit her lip but nodded. Trust me, Arlong would kill him just for meeting him in the eye. He believes that humans are S and loves finding excuses to kill us. Unless we make ourselves useful and pay his tribute every month. Tribute? Nijiko would answer, but Arlong's booming voice answered for her. All you had to do was follow our rules, human. Live your lives, get rid of every gun and blade, and pay us at the end of every month. But no, you had to be rebellious, didn't you? He squeezed tighter, enjoying the popping sensation as he did. You had to die, Arlong. The old man slipped from his grip but was quickly caught as the fishman and his cohorts looked over to the young girl, staring them down with fury in her eyes. Against every survivalist fiber of her being, Nijiko came into plain view and much to everyone's shock began to berate them. You idiot! Where is your precious profit in killing Genzo? For 8 years Kokoyashi village has paid your stupidly high tribute. Even after you prevented any traitors from coming, killed any of us who tried to leave, we still managed to pull money out of nowhere to pay you the 100 grand for every adult and 50 for every child. Put Genzo down now. Everyone paused when they thought they heard something, like a seagull on helium being strangled. The fishman captain started speaking again first. So you want him released, do you? All right. But only on one condition. His life. For all of yours. Curtains shifted and clattering was heard from inside homes when he said that. If you. He pointed at Nijiko and swept his arm out. Any of you even think about touching me or any of us. I'll tear down every house and use the wood to make your headstones. He turned back to his luggage, and as for you, die. Sure, kill Nova Galaxy. The coward yelled at the top of his lungs, drawing the attention of the hulking fishman he just shot at just in time for him to see the tiny pellet reach him. What are you? Boom 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 ba boom ka blam. Small but extremely powerful explosions then could be tastefully put into the line above covered the pirate's form. The force of the combined blast blowing anyone within 10 feet of him onto their asses, including the one he was holding. The marksman expression changing from fearful to timid to curious, then to smug and finally happy. Just as the explosions reached their apex and the tiger fishman was lit up like a bonfire, Usopp was hopping from foot to foot like a prospector who struck rich. Ha ha ha, take that, you freaky fish guy. That's what you get when you face the might of the legendary Captain USSOP. What kind of a name is Usopp for a legendary pirate? A voice for Usopp stopped mid-happy, danced mid-crazy prospector and watched with horror as the smoke cleared, revealing a smoke and ash covered and royally pissed fishman. His favorite shirt and anything that didn't hide his decency were burnt off, but otherwise he was fine. Usopp suddenly wasn't feeling so hot anymore. Tear off his head and asterisk and percent carat in his skull. Gotta go ni seidomi tubai. He was a dot before they even started running. After him. That filth dared go against me. I want him stuffed and mounted on my wall. With all the ease of uprooting weeds, he lifted a house from its foundations and flung it in Usopp's direction, not caring in the least for the horrified screams coming from it until two humans threw themselves out of the door parallel with the ground. The house missed the fleet-footed teen by the narrowest of margins and he kept going. It took 4 other wish men to stop their leader from grabbing another building while he was having one of his episodes, begging him not to wreck another village. They'd lost enough tributes as it was. I'll kill that Puman if it's the last thing I do. Oh, like I was really going to go the whole story without mentioning Pumans. Seriously, how baked was the guy who thought that was a smart thing for the freaky fish guy to say? When you got right down to it, animals eating members of their own race wasn't that unusual. Birds ate birds. Cats ate cats and dogs ate, well, anything they shouldn't really. So it wasn't all that weird to see a fishman fishing. What was weird that he was somehow able to use 3 poles at the same time and not get them tangled up, even if he did happen to have 6 arms. The orangey pink octopus fishman whistled with a mouth like a fleshy trumpet, happily spending his time in less violent ways than his compatriots. He'd taken his fallen crewmate to his room where the squid applied first aid and let him rest. Arlong was cool with letting fishmen get a second chance if they survived. Then he'd cleaned up the blood, which was a sink when you were one of the only members of the male species in the world who could multitask. Now he just had one more thing to do before he feed the fish. He felt a tug on his middle rod. It was a big one. He took 2 hands from his adjacent rods and grabbed the one tugging one. Come on. He grunted and with a mighty heave pulled the thing up, revealing a fish easily as big as he was. This will do. He dropped his other rods and held his free hands over his mouth like a trumpet. Momo lunchtime. The fish was really fighting him, like it knew what was going to happen if it didn't break free. Momo, come and get it, he called out again. He had to put his remaining hands on the rod, the pole covered from top to bottom by his fingers. This thing must be part sea king or something to give a former sunny pirate like him trouble. Where is that blasted sea cow? Now. Do you go with white or red wine? Sanji was in deep contemplation as he paced back and forth over the carcass of the Grand Line beast. Just moments ago the giant cow-headed fish had thought to make the budding armada its lunch. It managed to capsize one boat before he had caved its nose ring into its brain with one solid kick. Who cares? Just start cookin'. Luffy was banging against the side of his own boat with a knife and fork he'd pulled out of his ass, not literally of course, along with many of his forcibly drafted and recently starved underlings. Jin, however, was locked onto the rather large brass nose ring it was sporting. Its size was unimportant, thousands of people had the strength to lug that about easy enough. His concern was whoever was powerful enough to make a semi-intelligent Sea King wear such a thing without any signs that it had struggled during piercing was probably on the island where they were headed. Momo-o, huff Mumu. Hachi was bellowing as loud a mouse, by which I mean not very loud at all, his voice growing raspy and tired very quickly. Where is that blasted fish? Hey, I missed one, a voice said from behind him. The octopus had barely had time to react. With a flash of light the fishman found himself inches away from being takoyaki, his poles clashing with the sword held by a green-haired human. It was only because his poles were designed for his species use or he'd have been a goner. Hey, what the hell are you doing? You can't just walk around with swords swinging. You could hurt someone, he said indignantly. Yeah, that's the idea, Zoro responded. Oh yeah. Hachi, remaining right, hit his left palm. Is this guy for real? So you gonna put up a fight? Or drop like the rest of those assholes I took care of? Assholes? He jumped out of range of Zoro's blade and peered up over the wall, his eyes bugging out. The whole of Arlong Park was littered with the bodies of his comrades. All were unconscious, but all were still breathing. Not easy to tell if mind you unless the breathing involved hacking coughs and pained twitches every few seconds. When did? Out here for 10 minutes and you? 6 fingers pointed at Zoro, eyes full of fire. Me. He grinned despite a mouth full of sword. You? Do you know who did this? A cold wind blew between them. A seagull cawed in the distance. Me. He said finally. What? Hachi backed away, his hands all in a warding motion. You're scary. Wado almost slipped out of his mouth before he caught it. Thinking for a second, he took a step closer. Please don't, Hachin said terrified. Low look. You're strong, right? How's ab about I take you to Kokoyashi? Lots of pretty human girls. Maybe even beat Arlong and get a big reward? He grinned pathetically. Zoro stood with blades outstretched at his captive. The others he'd taken out before they could make a sound, but he'd always had a problem with the beggars. He'd never be able to understand exactly how the most dangerous and hideous blackguards and cutthroats on the sea could suddenly put on the cute and innocent act and find himself falling for it. Even that one time when the criminal in question was 75, more scars than wrinkles, and pointing a pistol at him. He resheathed his swords. Fine. He caught Hachi's immense look of relief. He didn't catch that he didn't refer to Arlong as his lord. Arlong growled and gnashed the entire way back to base, 4 of his subordinates having to keep at his side the entire way to make sure he didn't cost them any more loot than he already had. Stopping in front of the gates, the shark effortlessly shrugged of his men's grip, yelled up over the thick iron to demand entrance. We're back. Let us in. No response. Not in the mode to ask again, he lifted his leg and kicked it open. The metal crumpled like paper and flung open, swinging around and breaking their hinges doing so. I said we're back. You better not be eating without me or all. The other stepped through what was the gates. Lord Arlong, we heard you trail of mid-sentence in shock. What is? It was at that point that a large octopus jar floated back into the base, its carrier leaping out of the water and greeting his crewmates, which to his confusion were all standing around making really annoying high-pitched noises. Hey, what are you guys doing? They didn't answer. Oh, charades. I love charades. I'll get it in 3 guesses. He put his hand under his chin. Are you? No. What about? Nah. He scratched his head in frustration. I know, you're a gaggle of babbling idiots. Hell. The hell? What the hell happened to my park? Why is half my crew dead? Hachin cocked his head to the side in puzzlement and looked down. His foot was standing between a clownfish man's chest and stomach, with nothing but air between the two. Huh. Everyone's dead, imagine that. Holy asterisk and caret %. Arlong pushed past him, grabbing hold of the only Piscus sapien who was still in one piece. Comrade, speak to me. He flailed his subordinate back and forth. Lord Arlong, he's dead. The mant. No, he's dead. Everyone is dead. It can't. He was grabbed by his shirt and brought face to face with the manta. He's dead. Everyone is dead. Lord Arlong, everybody is dead. Everybody is dead. Lord Arlong, dead. Arlong, Lord, everybody is. Arlong, dead, Lord. The inventive usage of just 4-5 words managed to filter the message into the shark mont's brain, causing him to sink to his knees. Who did this? What sort of monsters could just up and kill 20 of us without a single casualty on their side? Actually, it was only one guy, said Hachi offhandedly, drawing looks from his compatriots. Hachi, do you know who did this? The octopus nodded. It was that sash guy who we had tied up. I didn't see it, but he said he did all this by himself. The other fishmen began mumbling to themselves. The words, liar, and only human, sprung up several times. Arlong rose to his feet and used the mere inch he was taller than Hachi to stare down at him. If you knew it was him, then why didn't you stop him? Armed with what? The guy had 3 swords and took out 20 of us without me hearing a peep. Was I supposed to cast my lines out and hope he'd bite? You could have done something. It's a disgrace that you would do nothing while our comrades were being slaughtered. They were dead before I knew what had happened. I wasn't about to throw my life away pointlessly. Tiger-sama would agree with me. Don't you dare say his name, Lord Arlong. We got him. Yeah. No, look, the amount of shtick I get for this story is huge, okay? If I continue like this, it's gonna be almost word for word like the manga. So I'm gonna skip over everything that wouldn't change. I promise you this won't happen often. As the story progresses, the characters will diversify more than just Luffy, Logia and Usopp having real weapons. I know some people will be disappointed and feel like I'm being lazy. But I'd rather be lazy than a total plagiarist. Besides, is anybody really gonna read fan fiction about a series without checking out the series first? Now then, a figure said in the shadows, raising a tattered gloved hand. Let's see if we can't skip to the good parts. The world went numb and cold for the icy redhead. Her vision faded, her ears filled with a deafening hush, her body as unfeeling as rock. She didn't even notice the pain as a knife drove into her arm over and over and over again. Her arm moving on its own, driving the knife a little deeper into her shoulder with every stab. Nothing. The tattoo on her arm growing no less visible, only uglier. I did nothing. Blood pouring in a rivulet while she worked to cleave her arm off as slowly and painfully as possible. Bellemare, all these years, have been for nothing. She gripped the knife a little tighter, stabbing down again when a firm but gentle hand stopped her. She looked up, the gray of her mind's eye leaving her sight, and the rays of the sun bathed the hand's owner. Luffy stood over her, face completely blank, showing none of his famous idiocy or his explosive anger. The expression was all too neutral, and that scared her. True good or true evil was easy to deal with. At least you knew how to deal with. Neutrality was something no one was prepared for. How could you deal with someone who looked like they were about as likely to break your arm and heal it at the same time? Luffy. She wanted to scream at him. Smash her staff into his indestructible skull and drag him back to his ship. Tear into him and hurt him in the hundreds of ways she knew how to hurt someone without even touching them, and guarantee that he'd never want to even remember her name again. She wanted to do all these things, yet when she tried to lift her other hand to smash him, it wouldn't rise. Her voice couldn't create a syllable before she sniffed. Instead, all that would pass by her lips is one very pitiful and very overdue word. Help. For moments the only sound was of the wind whistling and her own sniffling. He wasn't going to help her, obviously. Why should he? She was a traitor and he was a pirate. Why would he? A weight settled on her head. Opening her eyes, she still found her vision shaded, the object on her head protecting her from the sunlight. She reached up to grab it but pulled her fingers away when she felt its dry straw surface. His hat? Why would he? Her mind flashed to her first meeting with Luffy. He held onto this thing like it was a part of him. Even touching it would guarantee a cruel and brutal demise. Hold on to this till we get back, he said politely. She didn't respond. Ready, guys? He asked his men, who mysteriously appeared next to him in cool show-off poses. Yeah. Do I have a choice? They said mostly as one. Good. He tilted his head, making a disgusting cracking noise. Let's go fishing. Knock knock knock. A wide-mouthed, sharp-toothed fishman was leaning against the wall swilling suds while the rest of his comrades partied when he heard the knocking. He gave the gates a glance and thought nothing of it, returning to his inebriation. Knock knock knock. Asterisk. The knocking grew even stronger. The fishman growled into his mug and snarled over the wall. Get lost, human. Can't you hear us celebrate? Knock knock knock. And $. Asterisk. He pulled up from the wall, stomped to the gate and opened a portal in the middle. What do you? Bam. He slowly closed the portal, turned and walked over to where his crewmates and leader were raking their fingers through a cool 100 million. Ordahone, he said quietly. The greedy fishman stopped thumbing a roll of bills next to his ear long enough to answer. What is it, Naya? What the hell? EH's Oman 8. And with that the pirate grabbed his jaw, now 7 inches further to the left than it was before, and pushed it back in place with a disgusting crack, and promptly fainted. By the time anyone realized they should help, the sound of metal crumpling like old paper echoed over the park. The gates were torn of their hinges courtesy of Luffy's fist, sending them crashing at the fishmen's feet. The collected straw hats stood there for a moment. Even the cowardly Usopps even stare, sending a shiver up a few spines. Then, acting almost as one, they slowly walked into the park in a diamond formation with Luffy front and center, Zoro and Sanji at his sides, and Usopp with his slingshot drawn back coming up in the back. Arlong furrowed his eyes and ground his teeth. Not wasting breath on lower life forms, he snapped his fingers, sending Hachi, Karubi and Chu charging at them without a second or even first thought. Zoro. Hachi's Rokuryu. Pieces of 8 feet attack was blocked by Zoro. The swordsman's single blade managing to divert the course of the heavier blows away from the others while himself dodging. Sanji. Fist met foot directly over Luffy's melon. The fishman wide-eyed in shock at the blonde matching his power with no more effort than he was exerting. Usopp. Usopp, leave it to me Luffy. Everyone stopped mid-air combat to look in the direction of the echoing voice. With the fleeing form of the sniper getting smaller and smaller with Chu close behind him, an occasional splash of water of mid-sized explosion the only proof that it really was a fight. Luffy turned back and stared dead ahead, directly into Arlong's beady little eyes. You. Needle Nose sneered, get him. His men, seeing the quiet rage in the human's eyes stood for but a second, before leaping at Luffy, rising like a great wave about to come crashing down on the hapless human. Too bad for them that Luffy was far from hapless. Without turning his unblinking gaze from the shark man he swept out in black smoking arm. Each and every one of them collapsed to the ground with a dull thud, all groaning and grunting as they were slowly crushed under the weight of their own bodies. Their leader's eyes bulged at the sight of his men being defeated so easily by a human. Who the hell do you think you are? He didn't wait for an answer before charging the minuscule boy with jogs stumbled back until he hit wall. Grabbing his mouth where his razor-sharp teeth were how a dentist's wet dream. He pulled his hands away as the pain subsided, silently glaring at the Straw Hat Kid who had yet to let up his own. Oh Tink did his funny bow. He gummed. Right before his head was put through the wall by another direct-to-face punch. No more talking, he said evenly, his fist already cocked back again. Rokuryu. Takoyaki dicer. 6 swords blurred and became like 30 swords. Stabbing at the moss-haired man who couldn't even hold half normally. Santoryu. Bleed the wolf. Zoro's movements became a blur of ballet-like motions to which only the holding of his single blood-hungry blade saved his masculinity. Every step bringing him closer in between the literal storm of metal. Santoryu. Wolf Fang. He was right next to Hachi when he was able to get a hit in. Twisting his head he avoided one last stab right between the eyes and disarmed his opponent all in one move. Ag Mayan *% carrying hand. Literally. Zoro winced ever so slightly at the sight. He only meant to cut through the nerves. Dismemberment wasn't a term he really enjoyed. Give up yet? He asked, disguising what he assumed was pity with forced arrogance. Hachi bit his lip, and dragged his remaining 5 swords up. You think I'm gonna let you get away with this? Yaw. He lunged forward, his arms blurring to become a whirling dervish of blades. The swordsman sighed before bringing up his own weapon to block the octopus. The leg was naturally 3 times stronger than the arm. This Karubi knew. So it would come to no surprise to many that if a punch collided with a kick then kick would win. However, this rule did not apply if the punch came from a species that was naturally 10 times stronger than the human the kick was delivered by. Normally, both combatants were visibly strained while trying to push the other back in a battle of sheer grit. Manta Mont's 1000 tile punch struggling to push back the spinning heel kick of Sanji who had bit through his cancer stick. Suddenly a light bulb went on in Karubi's head and he launched his long-forgotten other fist at the blonde's unprotected middle. He grinned when Sanji was forced to jump out of the way, only to fall into a handstand where he then continued his assault with a series of powerful windmill kicks. Karubi caught 2 but a third one got his right in the ear. Ah! Why you little? He grabbed Sanji's leg when the 4th kick came around intending to break it, but never got the chance when the blonde used to leverage to smash him in the face with his heel. Karubi backpedaled but still did not let go. Again and again Sanji laid into his opponent with his big black shoes. Until with one particularly strong close-range kick both of them were sent backwards and into the park's inlet pool. Usopp did what he did best. Chu's endless barrage of high-impact water pellets may as well have been gently floating bubbles. Stand still, an angry puckerfish screamed. Why do they always ask me to do that? Shouted Usopp wondered very loudly. Quickly reaching into one of his Liefeld brand pouches he pulled out a dark red marble and pulled back his slingshot. Spinning on his heel he yelled out. Sure kill. Blam! Zoro grunted in pain while trying to hold off 5 blades from embedding themselves in his skull. If it weren't for Watto being as fine a sword as it was, he'd be shredded like diced pork. Or takoyaki. Hachi sneered, which looked weird for a guy with a trumpet for a face. I heard the great Roronoa Zoro used 3 swords. And here I thought I'd get a challenge. If, goo. And, here I thought that. Octopus had 6 arms. He was starting to feel dizzy, the fresh scar along his chest throbbing in pain like it would tear any second. The October. Pentapus's eyes narrowed. I'm not just an octopus. I'm a cephalopod. Meaning? A powerful fist lifted him off the ground and crashing through a wall answered his question. Hachi followed after him, ignoring the crowd of humans that had started forming. He picked up the downed and badly bleeding form of Zoro by the neck with his free hand. It means my limbs grow back. He brought Zoro's face up to his. Now, RRRAAAGGGHHH, bellowing as only a villain can, Arlong smashed his way out of his trap and managed to grab hold of Luffy with surprising speed. Shark dagger. He pulled Luffy close to him, then reeled back his head to deliver the mother of all headbutts, steel strong blade tip nose first. Luffy was no slouch though. In an instant black smoke billowed off him. Arlong let out an involuntary sound of shock when he saw the sudden eruption and almost dropped him prey. Not that he could, even if Luffy didn't want him to. You're mine, he said just as his power went from going straight up to smothering the both of them. I will not be beaten by a puman. Even as the blackness pulled him in, the ex-Sunny pirate struggled against it in futility. His arms, which had previously been trying to break the boy's back, felt like they were coated in caramel, as did the rest of him. I can't be killed like this. Vanish into endless darkness, you creep. Splash. Sanji found himself in a hopelessly similar situation. The arms of Manta Man around him and plunging at the rock bottom of the seabed like a rocket. His legs powerful enough to crush stone, only able to hit his enemy with all the strength of a child having a tantrum. Humans get slower in water, remember? Karubi grinned sadistically before letting go. And fishmen only get stronger. The split second between being released and the rough landing, Sanji used his full intellect to wonder how it was that he'd been able to hear the fishman so clearly underwater. Ba-kun, the blade-armed fishman, grinned wickedly at the ocean floor splitting apart like old chipboard. Sediment and all the filth laying on the bed, kicking up everywhere. Ha! I'd like to see your soft human head take hitting solid bedrock. Glub! Something shoot out of the dirt cloud like a speeding bullet, striking Karubi directly in the stomach and knocking him backwards. Unfiltered water suddenly rushed into his lungs through his gills and he began gasping for air. 1. As he doubled over, he himself was sent to the floor bed by an overhead axe kick. Zeph always did say the only thing harder than his kicks was my head. But like hell, I'll admit he was right. Sanji gave pause for just a second to admire his handiwork before making his way to the surface for precious air. He was 10 feet from the surface and only just starting to feel his insides burn when something broke the surface. Usopp was in a world of pain. His mouth was a mangled mess. His nose was bent out of shape and his brains felt like scrambled egg. His entire body was covered in cuts and bruises and he had just been hit dead on by a bullet made of pure water. It was only the shoulder. It would have been worse if Chu hadn't suddenly started sporting a similar wound in his stomach. You okay, kid? Jin asked, he and the rest of the nameless grunts of Luffy's crew coming out from behind the dense woodland. AGHH. Get away. Usopp tried backpedaling until the pain in his arms caused them to collapse under him. Whoa, easy easy. I'm one of you now. The grim-looking pirate said in as comforting a manner as he could. You think I can't tell when someone's lying? I'm the king of lying. He pulled back his slingshot and released it at his unknown shipmate. Jin dodged quick to the left and rushed him, grabbing the toy and tossing it to the side. The fact that the man did not immediately follow up with killing him actually did do something to soothe Usopp's worry. Believe me now, kid? No, he stood up, picking up his weapon. But I'll buy that you're not wanting to pick a fight with us. Good, now we better get to where the fight is. P2E Jin's was lifted a good few feet off the ground by a sphere of water passing directly through his chest. Usopp's jaw hung limply and a tiny yelp escaped his throat. Why you think I could be done? Lipped fishman huffed, holding his wound. Our run. Jin gasped out. though he didn't need to waste the energy since Usopp had vanished before Mega Mouth said his first unstuttered word. "Oh you little F. Whoops. Sorry about that." A pair of arms pulled him up and over a painfully bony shoulder before taking off at breakneck speed. The inky blackness evaporated as soon as Luffy hit the water, bringing him face to face with Arlong's grinning mug, which only widened as Luffy's cheeks puffed up in a vain attempt to keep the air in his lungs. "You know, I think that our species hate one another so much because we lack the ability to sympathize with each other," he monologued. "I can't understand how you feel." He suddenly tightened his grip, causing the young captain to open his mouth, letting the salt water to rush in. "I can't describe what it's like to have the salt water sting your eyes, or have the waters take life rather than give it." His tone grew more and more jovial the less Luffy struggled. "It's a pity that we can't truly understand each other. But know what? I don't give a damn." With that bellow he squeezed hard on his opponent's midsection until he heard a loud crack, and the last bubbles escaped his mouth. "I'm glad I can't sympathize with you. Or else I might feel guilty for everything I've done," he said. Somehow, since I now realize he's talking underwater, and let the boy go, letting him sink ever so slowly to the bottom, watching until he had almost his rock bottom. "Now for that traitor bitch." With a sudden surge he shot back up to the surface, not noticing the boy's descent had stopped. Sanji, against his survival instinct and the increasing pressure in his chest, swam back down to Luffy just as Arlong let his go, immediately grabbing hold of him and flying up to the surface. Arlong broke the surface of the water with a tremendous splash, landing on his feet and letting the water drip down him. A human with the power of the devil drowns like any other. And bleeds. Don't forget bleeds. Hachi's cheerful voice echoed. The crowd of gathered humans at the park gates parted to make way for the Octoman, carrying a crimson-soaked swordsman on his upper left shoulder. "Kinda sad really. Already had big whopping scars that ain't even healed yet. Didn't put up much more after whatever was holding them burst," he said in mock sadness before dumping the teen at Arlong's feet without as much as a groan. "And Chu? Last I saw, heard he was still chasing down that bone bag with the slingshot." The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. "Hey, if you recruited the guy who actually aimed instead of the one who just spat like a madman, then this wouldn't be a problem." The shark man mumbled something and kicked the human with his foot, lightly so his blood didn't touch him, and was only somewhat disappointed when he didn't get a response. He looked up at the gate towards a gaggle of gathered humans, men and women and children who had gathered in what he could only guess was to watch him fall. Horrified features marred their faces and spoke of a previous slim hope. He knew a lot about false hope, both receiving, giving and taking it away. "How many times do we have to go over this?" he said, slowly stepping forward, grimacing when they did not step equally back. "Your genetic backwash. Evolutionary dead ends with an overinflated sense of entitlement. You exist solely to serve your superiors, you exist to serve me." He heard the scraping of metal, the click of a gun. He, you ungrateful swine. I let you live. I gave you a chance and you repay me with discord." He leaned his head to the side. For some reason the cracking sound echoed from his jaw rather than his neck. "This would be the part where I say you only have yourselves to blame for this. But really all you did was make me do this sooner." He kicked off the ground at the crowd. Johnny and Yosaku held their swords steady and braved themselves. "They needn't have done anything really. What did they do again?" Arlong was pulled out of the air by a tug on his ankle and slammed back into the stone tiling. He grunted loudly and with a twist pulled his nose, which had pierced through the slab-like tissue, out with a sound like a drawing sword. He didn't have time to get up completely when he was pulled back again, and this time met with the wall. Disorientated Arlong never saw when a fist smacked him right between the eyes, then another, and another and another and yet another. His vision became a blur of curled-up digits. He was then grabbed up his arms and brought forward, where he met a very hard head which struck him hard enough to dig his own battered face into the ground. "You human wretch!" He tore himself out in a fury and grabbed Zoro by the arms just as he went for his swords. The shark man snarled and slapped his hand on the minty-haired boy's chest. What sounded like a depth charge going off rang out, and Zoro was sent through one of the main building's supports as though it was old timber. The poorly closed scar across his chest sprung back open and blood poured down his soaking chest. Arlong marched deliberately over to him, water dripping from his fingers in what was supposed to be a threatening manner. "All I need is a drop of water to kill a little thing like you. No human touches me and lives." Zoro. Despite the blood loose, head trauma, broken bones and other assorted maladies, actually managed a smile with what part of his face he could control. Meanwhile, in a place far enough to really annoy you. The trees were his friends. For as long as Usopp had been chased, he had learned all the tricks of the trade when it came to the sublime art of cowardice. He mastered every terrified trick, every yellow-bellied con. He could turn the most obvious things into undetectable hiding spots, perform acrobatic miracles as long it was with the pure intent of saving his life. He could think up a dozen escape routes in the time anyone else would take to start thinking up one, and knew the best ways to put everything between him and his pursuers without stopping to do it. The use of the forest was just one of the many ways in which he could gleefully avoid harm. Choose water bullets splashed against the trees. Not harmlessly either. Trunks splintered under the blasts of ultra-high-velocity liquid the same way they would a zero-range blast from a rifle. He ran deeper and deeper into the woods, hiding behind a particularly thick tree while water shots still whizzed overhead. He slid Jin of his shoulders and against the tree. "Where?" the martial artist wheezed, clutching his oozing wound. "Woods." Usopp answered as bluntly, jumping a little when one shot scraped some bark away. "Can't keep hiding," Jin muttered, clutching his bleeding wound. "I was never planning to." He loaded up his slingshot and pulled it tight. "I noticed that Needleface's chest getting smaller and smaller each time he shot at us. He's probably isn't making the water himself, so I just have to wait till he needs to fill back up and he's mine." So wait he did, not an easy task when it's waiting under fire. While the world on either side of them was smashed and splintered under the heavy barrage, Usopp stayed firmly in place. Even when the tree he was hiding behind began to give way, even when one shot whizzed so close to his ear that it shaved the skin from his lobe and cheek. He held firm and waited, too stubborn to run and too scared to flee. While both men had different attitudes towards the situation, neither would back down even if another opportunity presented themselves. They kept their concentration on the jets of H2O whizzing past them until the machine gun-like barrage stopped. Now, both men dashed out from whether side of the tree. Usopp drew back his slingshot while Jin cocked a flintlock and charged wildly ahead, bellowing loud enough to drown out the tiny voices in their head that said this was a really stupid idea. They charged out of the woods, jumping out of the tree line and stopped. "Where'd he go?" Usopp asked, relieved if why is it when he was brave no one could see him. "Kid, I think we better take cover back in the woods," said Jin, cartwheeling backwards much to his crewmates' confusion. "Why? That needle nose can't still be around here, right? Not after he ran off from our awesome war cry." His delusions of grandeur were already going to work. First rule of pirating, kid. Fishmen don't just abandon sources of water. He started backstopping, his eyes firmly locked on the nearby lake. Usopp followed his gaze and noticed a whirlpool rapidly forming. "You, Don, think that?" Jin had already started running for cover again. Before even he could join him, the whirling stopped and something burst out of the water, rising high enough to tower over Usopp and block out the light. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." The fishman had swollen up like a balloon. His chest was almost cartoonishly blown up. His face was just visible over the water-filled torso, his cheeks red and straining to hold back a literal flood. "Let's see ya dodge this, you twiggy freak." Oddly enough, Usopp's last thought before a raging river overtook him was not terror. Rather it was, now if he had a puppet while he talked like that I'd be really impressed. Now what you may be asking by now is, where the hell is Luffy? It's a fairly good question. I mean, I can't just switch between Zoro and Usopp without eventually going back to the star of the series, now can I? Well, the thing is, there is a complication with Luffy at the moment that Sanji is having difficulty resolving. He was still unconscious after his little swim and had swallowed a lot of seawater, which, since no one else was brave enough right now to come inside the park, meant the woman-loving Sanji has to. "Nami, Nami, this is Nami. I'm about to kiss Nami. My lips are the lips that will breathe life back into her moist, full rub. This isn't working." He had done this before. Living on a boat, Zeph had insisted that everyone know mouth to mouth and let it be known that it was not kissing but saving another's life. He'd been a little uncomfortable but had persisted by picturing hot women right up until Patty had went overboard and Sanji had been the only one able to save him. He shuddered at the memory, the lips, the giant elephantine lips. Sanji knew he had to do this. He was the only one who could save his captain at the moment. He had to do this. Gulping, he screwed his eyes shut, took a deep breath, and this paragraph has been deleted for strong sexual imagery that springs up in the mind of adolescent females when more than one male character appears with another for any period longer than 3 seconds in an anime. P2E. The blonde chef's, not as good looking as he thinks it is, face was nearly shaved clean off when a blast of water shot out of Luffy's powerful lungs and into the air like a fountain. He gagged and sputtered for a second more, then leapt to his feet, apparently no worse for wear despite near death. "Alright, I'm alive," he cheered, "but why does my mouth taste like tar and old socks?" "Never mind that," the cook yelled, eager to change the subject. "Arlong was walking through the other last I checked. We need to get back to the fight quick." His captain smirked and grabbed his shoulder. "Fast, got it." "Hey, what are you? Arlong's grip almost crushed Zoro's face at the sight of the smile. "What's so amusing, human?" His answer was his back erupting in pain, forcing him to drop his captive. He clutched the areas that felt like it was hit by a jackhammer and falling to his knees. He turned sharply only to be belted between the eyes. "And that was for all the weird look whenever I make takoyaki." What few fishmen remained paralyzed at the sight of their swordsman, cook, pummeling their leader. "Hachi, what do you think you're doing?" Hachi would have cracked his knuckles if he had any to begin with, beating on an idiot. "He's our leader, your comrade, does that mean nothing?" Hachi shook his head. "Not when guys like you and him are making it impossible for other decent fishmen." He punctuated each word with another vicious blow. Tiger-sama hated humans, but he didn't go looking for a fight. He didn't kill his enemies unless he had to, and never just because he could. He joined his 6 fists into 3 hammers and brought them crashing down one on top of the other. 6-fold octo hammer. The first blow crashed down on his head, the second set of fists slammed down on the first one, driving his skull down further, and as the fourth one came down, the leader of the fishmen pirates was driven into the concrete floor up to his abused neck with a spectacular crunch sound effect. "I went with you to try and keep you from rampaging, but I'm sick of dealing with a grown man acting like a child having a temper tantrum. If I have to beat you into the ground and drag you back to Fishman Island by your gnaw." His over-righteous and completely out-of-character speech was cut off by a serrated nose tip. "My gnaw? What's a gnaw?" He punctuated his taunting words with a crack of his neck, twisting his pointy conch inches from Hachi's heart. Without even a grunt of effort, he raised his head with the pink fishman still attacked, and with casual ease flicked him off, where he crashed into the wall, leaving a sizable crack. "Not surprised, really. You never kept quiet about those humans you were friends with. Still." He flicked his hand in the traitor's direction. A droplet of water flew from his fingers with the force of a bullet and hit Hachi right in the chest. The octopus jumped slightly from the force and fell still. Now where were we? He looked over at his initial victim, who only now was staggering to his feet. Zoro wiped the blood from his eyes and took whatever stance he could, before taking another after realizing he didn't have any swords. "Cough, I was about to hack your ass." Arlong guffawed, half dead and barely able to stand. "What are you gonna do, human? Bleed on me?" Whatever witty, or far more likely stupid thing the swordless swordsman was about to say was interrupted by a black missile sailing past him via a large hole in the compound wall. Arlong managed to dodge by a hair's breadth, letting it land with all the grace of a cat against what little remained of the park's wall and drop to the ground. However, he had already done his job, as the few seconds Arlong was off balance was one more than was needed for Luffy to come up behind his blonde projectile and deck Arlong between the eyes, sending him careening into the drink. "Well, that was easy," Luffy said, grinning from ear to ear, not noticing everyone who still just barely conscious glaring holes through him. Zoro, collapsed with his head directed over the pool, was the only one to notice Arlong's sinking bubbles suddenly stop, which lasted but a few seconds before the eponymous fishman exploded out of the water as a more effective speeding torpedo than Sanji ever could be. Luffy was fortunate enough to only be struck by Arlong's speeding clothesline rather than his bladed appendage. He was slammed backwards with his hand smacking into the stone slabs, which seemed extremely popular today for some reason. The fish missile continued forward as though he hadn't hit anything and disappeared into his beloved base with a loud crash through the wall, only to appear a few seconds later aiming once more at Luffy, who had jumped to his feet. The boy was once again knocked to the floor, but not without leaving a large gash on his upper arm and yet again vanishing into the water. The onlookers watch in horror as the captain was, to their eyes, being knocked around like a rag doll by a gray and yellow blur, and utterly helpless to stop it. Water tore through the trees, ironically enough like it would wet tissue paper. All the cute woodland creatures not smart enough to scurry away from the fight were crushed under the explosive wave from the impact of the hydro cannonball, decimating everything in Chu's line of sight until all that was left was a soaked and splintered clearing. His body shrank back to it, surveyed his handiwork. Not smirking like his captain, the shark that he was tended to do, but viewed the disaster area carefully for any sign of life. No way the sicko and the sticko survived that. He faced the way he had came, better head back to the park in case they need me. He smiled a little at something that wasn't really that funny. A rustle in the debris. He turned on his heel and started spitting again. A veritable machine gun volley of water drops slammed into the spot where he heard the noise, turning the remains of the wood into soggy pulp. He grinned in an embarrassed manner. Guess it was nothing. Bang 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 bangin' fangin' gang. FWOOSH. He didn't even have time to scream. From out of the woodwork they sprouted. The nameless crewmen that Luffy had forcibly recruited from Krieg, flintlocks smoking. Usopp tugged an almost dead Jin out of the wreckage, his slingshot in hand and Jin one bottle poorer. I can't believe he fell for the old, what was that, throw a rock trick, he muttered. I can't believe you threw away my whiskey. Jin growled as fiercely as he could, which wasn't very well as the moment. I can't believe we're actually part of the plot, said one faceless pirates. Believe it, men, cheered the sniper, dropping Jin to the ground while he pumped his fists in the air. Together we have done what others can only dream of, we have slain a fishman. Aye. The men cheered. Usopp stood on Jin's downed skull, ignoring the muttering beneath his feet. He continued. Let it be known that together there is nothing that we, the Straw Hat Pirates, can accomplish. Let this be the start of our legend. We shall find One Piece. We shall be the rulers of the sea. Aye. He stomped down once more. And now, my brave warriors, as the future masters of all we survey, let us go forth and continue to go past the impossible. Let's take down the most feared one of this blue. Today Sawtooth Arlong is finished at the hands of USSOP the Great and his mighty pirate warriors. USSOP, 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 USSOP. Without any surprise or protest, a particularly burly man lifted the teen onto his soldiers while the others rallied around his, rushing back to Arlong Park to face what they knew to be a nigh impossible task. Jin just continued muttering into the dirt, wondering how far the captain would let him go without killing that yellow-streaked dead man. Luffy quite literally did not know his left from his right, being pushed this way and that way by a blindingly painful force. He tried calling up his powers for aid, but just as he was about to let loose with an explosion of inky darkness, Arlong slammed into him again and bounced his brain around until he didn't know A from B. How am I Sue? Ah. Can I? GEH. COMEON. PHT. I could really use a flashback right now. Equals as you wish equals. God damn it, boy, you're supposed to dodge. A gruff and angry voice owned by a gruff and angry old man boomed out. The boy receiving the yelling was crouching in the middle of a clearing, shaking like a leaf with his hands over his head. The ground around him and cliff face behind him were covered in crater marks, inside of which were the remains of what used to be baseballs. I said move it, the bearded psycho shouted before flicking another baseball at the kid with his thumb. A crack went off like a pistol at the ball hurtled at the boy where it cracked the ground next to him, making him jump from shock. Good, now just keep doing that and you'll be fine. That's easy for you to say, old man. Your grandpa isn't trying to kill ya. WHO, do you think taught me, brat? He tossed another ball. This one grazing against the side of Luffy's face fast enough to leave a bloody mark before smashing against the cliff face. Yow, he howled and grabbed at his cheek. What's the point of all this? Reflex training, he yelled in a more passive voice, seeing his grandson genuinely in pain. That blasted defective Logia has lowered your pain tolerance, and I don't know if I can train up something done by one of those stupid things. So instead we're build on your ability to dodge." He flipped another ball into the air. "Out on the Grand Line you find plenty of hotshots who can easily trump that molasses of yours. So if someone like you wants to survive you need split-second reaction time and an instinct like you can see the future. Or else." Wham! Luffy was flat on his back out like a light, his mouth full of gaps. Maybe I should stop hitting my grandkid in the head so much. Nah, what's the worst that could happen?" He crouched down and stared at his grandson for a second, before picking up a stick and proceeding to jab him in the face. End flashback okay. Bearing the nightmares about baseball he had for months after that, the old man did manage to teach him what he set out to. Blocking out everything else, Luffy focused on his attacker. Unlike Garp, who kept Luffy guessing where the attack was coming from, Arlong was practically dancing, going through the same steps over and over. Now all he had to do was catch the speeding fish monster by his face without getting his arm chomped off. Easy. He screwed his eyes shut and relaxed as best he could, looking for the pattern anything that goes on long enough slips into. Waiting for the right moment. Left, right, left, left. Rig that stings. Right, now. Luffy's hand lashed out. Arlong darted forward. Fuick. Oh, right through the palm. Lego you brat. Arlong reaching out at the boy pinned to his face, right before the boy's other hand came into play. Eclipse punch. A dozen times the boy's already inhuman strength smacked Arlong right in the forehead. He went flying back into his lair, followed by a red and blue blur. Luffy did not let his prey go. He clung to Arlong like a limpet, holding him by a breaking shoulder, and continued pounding his blackened knuckles into his face over and over, plouging through walls and floors like plywood and eventually stopping in a room on the top floor filled to the brim with paper. "Get off!" The Morgana mustered the strength to toss Luffy off, sending him into an old cupboard. The boy staggered a little but managed to pull himself from the broken wood. He glared at the taller man, matching his stare at least until he took notice of the room around him. Charts and graphs covered almost every inch of the floor. A map of every blue was pinned to each wall, and over a dozen stacks of paper still towered from the floor and pressed firmly against the ceiling even after they burst in. He looked over the room methodically, connecting the dots far quicker than most gave him credit for. "Nami's room," he stated. Arlong coughed and smiled with red-stained teeth. "Like it? I spared no expense to make my most valued subordinate comfortable." Luffy's eyes flitted to the ornate hand-carved desk. An inkwell and quill laying across a half-finished map, the wood stained red and black. "So I had her draw a few thousand maps. Living like this doesn't come cheap, and to join my crew, a human at such a young age. I never heard her say no," he grinned. The boy fell to his ass, eyes lifeless. "Oh, don't give me that. You think I don't know what's going to happen next?" he said while edging to the right. "You're gonna just sit there while I monologue, getting madder and madder until I attack. You block me with that freak muscle of yours and beat me into a pulp. I read enough comics growing up to recognize the scene I'm in, which is why." He smashed his fist smashed through the wall, then almost immediately retracted it. The rest of the wall caved inwards when a massive steel implement slashed through it and right at Luffy. The boy caught the blade effortlessly, the naturally inhuman strength of Arlong not moving the weapon an inch more. Arlong, instead of his usual reaction, smirked and twisted the handle of his giant saw. It popped right off and Luffy was suddenly staring down a barrel. "I'm gonna cheat." Bang! A tendril of ink only as wide as the bullet reached up must ink and absorbed the bullet without him even attempting to look up at him. He did, however, reverse the direction the saw was facing and slashed at Arlong with the broken blade, catching the fishman on a jagged edge and pinning him to the wall by the neck. "I can't get mad at you for having Nami draw all these. I can't make heads or tails of maps to save my life, so I can't really put money on how valuable these all are." The edge pushed tighter against his neck, red dots starting to trickle. "I can't hate you for treating humans like this either. I heard how people treat you guys. My Gramps has a bigger mouth than me." Arlong pushed vainly against the weapon, digging into his gullet. "But one thing I can get mad at. You made Nami cry." Just as he gained an inch in ground, the needle-nosed great white was pulled forward by his chin to the center of the room, a hand curling around his throat. No one makes my navigator cry. If these maps are so important, you then take them to hell with you. Black hole. There was no oozing darkness. No inky blackness bursting out of the windows and pouring down the building in a great flood, until it covered every inch of the structure, where the black outline would grow smaller until only an angry Luffy and an ugly Hawaiian shirt stained in blood remained. Arlong Park imploded. The mansion, castle, fortress was pulled into itself with great force. Bricks and mortar that were already crushed to dust were pulverized right down to the basic atomic elements and pulled into a silent vacuum that drew in matter and energy alike. Everyone present, from humans to what few remaining fishmen to whatever the hell Usopp was, gaped at the most absolute destruction anyone dare ever say they've seen. Nothing was spared. Forget no stone standing on the other. Within a mere minute there was nothing in that space. The entire structure and the space 20 feet around it had vanished into a hole that looked as though someone had poked a hole in the sky. 21. Boom! They were knocked off their feet by a sudden collapse of air into the zero matter zone the black hole had created. Rising to their feet in time to see the tear in reality distend. Darkness bulging forth from it until it lowered to the ground like an ink loogie. The closed over a second later and merged with the trail of darkness that dissipated a second later, revealing Luffy with his hat covering his eyes. Sawtooth Arlong at his feet, looking like he'd been put through a rusty blender. With a heave, it tossed the once mighty terror of the East up out of the hole and right at Nami's feet. The girl stared at her tormentor with wide, unbelieving eyes. The rolled-back expressionless was nothing like the sneer of superiority she had grown up with. His strong arms, which could lift buildings, were bent at unnatural angles, and the nose he had boasted as being stronger than a diamond was snapped clean in two. She brought her hands up to her mouth, not wanting others to hear her stutter and stammer like an idiot. Tears swelling up in her eyes with only Luffy's hat hiding them. Nami. She looked up. The dark man leaping out of the empty hole and looking right at her. Finger pointed right between her eyes, while his own were filled with nothing short of absolute resolve. We're crewmates forever. Fat drops rolled down her cheeks and she nodded. It was all she could do, since she had her willpower on overdrive to keep anything other than tears escaping her face than actual relief. The spectators watching, human and fishman alike, stared at the scene for a few moments before their mind caught up with what their eyes had seen. Humans let out long overdue cheers of happiness and grabbed each other to join in spontaneous dace, while the fishmen, who were more active in their membership of Arlong's crew, dragged themselves to the water and plunged in. Their inherent abilities kicking in almost instantly, and they made a beeline for anywhere but there. Got it, she said, rubbing her eyes. Grabbing the straw hat off her head and tossing it like a frisbee into Luffy's waiting hand. Now listen up, you freaky fish guys. Not a freaky fish guy. Everyone present looked around, trying to see where the voice had come from, to no avail. You guys are finished. Arlong's done, and this island is under my crew's protection, got that? The few that were conscious nodded vigorously. Now you've got two choices. You can either drag yourselves back to wherever you came from, or come with us, Usopp suggested. Or come with. Everyone stared at the long-nosed youth, glaring at spoiling such an epically dramatic moment. What? It was obvious he was gonna ask that, he defended weakly. So, or come with us, he yelled with his arms pumped in the air. The fishmen who were alive and conscious, the barely breathing, the broken, the cowardly, and the traitor looked around. The power they had here was gone, as was their leader. If they wanted to survive with their infamy, they'd have to make a beeline back to Fishman Island, swimming all the way, which they'd be lucky to survive with this few in number and bleeding. It was really just a phantom choice. I'm in, Hachi said, his 6 arms crossed over his chest and waist. A karate manta man mumbled, a lump the size of a basketball growing from his skull. One by one the rest of the fishman nodded. A few more attempted to flee and no one stopped them. It was their choice after all. But even without them, Luffy's crew had grown by another 12 men. Geez, Luffy. You keep recruiting everyone we beat up, we'll have a fleet 10 times bigger than Krieg before we get to the line. Luffy's mouth once more became half-teeth. That's the idea. That's a confession if I've ever heard one. A dozen guns were heard being cocked unnecessarily and citizens were shoved rather rudely out of the way to make room for the last-minute heroes known as the Marines. The man in the lead was not what you would expect for what his uniform conveyed his rank being. 2 heads shorter than the men behind him, beady eyes, kind of scrawny in the muscle department, wearing an animal ear hood that a 5-year-old would say they were too old for. This guy looked less like a Marine and more like the cover model for Mustache-Twirling Villains Monthly, which he never would have made since he only had a soul patch and 6 long hairs springing from his face jutting out like whiskers. Nezumi, Nami growled, tightening the grip on her staff, to which the Marine was ignorant of as he marched up to the pirates with the entirety of his squad's guns pointed at them. "Well, well, well," he said in a voice like Severus Snape if his balls never dropped. "I leave the island for a meeting back in Marineford for a short while, and what do I find? Piracy." "You knew about Arlong," Nami growled. "Arlong? Kihihi, idiot child, what would a member of the infamous Sunny Pirates be doing in this backwater place? The only pirates I see here is you. Well, you and the innocent fishmen you're forcing into a pirate fleet you just admitted to making." He pointed a finger at Luffy and what on anyone else would have been somewhat threatening. "Don't you dare act like you don't know," she growled, marching up to him and lifting the rat by his lapels much to the shock of the Marines who thought to train their weapons on the only one who looks even moderately threatening, by which I mean Usopp. "For 10 years you let Arlong do as he pleased as long as you could line your pockets. You let my mother, a fellow Marine, get killed. You let Arlong treat us like slaves. Do you know how many people are dead because you wanted money more than justice? Put him down now," commanded the Marines who had swung their weapons to face Nami. Whack-bam, various sounds of blunt trauma. And almost immediately got taken down by the dangerous-looking men they never should have taken their weapons off of to point at a girl with a stick. Nezumi rather immediately lost his cocky grin which he'd held even as the girl threatened him. Wait," he cried as everyone and their grandma, old lady keeps a sword and that cane, advanced with murderous intent on the poor bastard. "If you let me go I'll forget this whole incident. I'll send people to fix the island, I can keep you off the wanted board, I'll do anything Jew." "Hold it," surprisingly that had come from Luffy. He walked calmly up to where Nami was holding up Nezumi and swiftly pulled him from her grip. Holding him with his own superior strength at arm's length, he looked dead into the rat eyes. The man grinned nervously. What are you going to do? Kill me and the Navy will come looking. Beat me and let me go and I'll point them right at you. Let me go and I'll spare your misserable. Vorp blackness swallowed him. The boy who had essentially just eaten a man alive looked to his navigator who had become less tanned in the intervening seconds. "Which way is the nearest Marine base?" She shook her head a little and with only a few seconds of thought pointed in the exact direction she knew a Marine base would be. He turned in that direction and hunched over, the darkness forming over his head again. Yami. Wait, you need the cannon." 2 masses were fired out of the blackness like rockets, speeding into the distance until they were twinkles in the skyline. He brushed his hands in satisfaction. There now when he lands near a Marine base that Rat has to arrest Arlong if he doesn't want to raise questions. And when he eventually hits something going at breakneck speeds turning him into jelly, said Nami, a twitch in her eyes. "Oh, in that case the death of a Marine might be looked into tracing it back to, nuts. Gank, and that's all I know," gasped out the fishman, on his knees sitting in freshly splattered Marine as he felt the infinite pressure being exerted on his skull by the gentle fingers. Although Luffy can't be blamed since his crash landing merely resulted in horrible bruising and only half his skeleton in breaks. "How did you know about the stuff you weren't around for?" his inquisitor asked. He shrugged as best he could with dislocated shoulders. "And you're sure that's all you know?" he said slowly. Arlong felt a spike of ice replace his spine far colder than even the most frigid waters of the Grand Line, but could not help but say, "Yes." Very well. Leon, if you would." The faintest of sounds, like cracking ice, and suddenly the terror which had haunted a little red-haired girl's nightmares for a decade went limp. The hand holding his oval-shaped skull released him to fall back into the waters from which he was born, the Denden Mushi and the executioner's other hand making tutting sounds. "I had hoped to glean more from someone who knew the girl so intimately, but I suppose having his head in the vice may have hindered his cognitive ability." The snail looked at the man holding it. Long red hair flowed to his waist with the back done in a top knot from which hair still cascaded down. A long dark red open jacket was ill-fitted over the boy rather scrawny physique which was hidden under several layers of heavy dull green undershirts. His black pants were equally and ill-fitting and clearly filled with padding which managed to match his kung fu slippers. A kiseru rolled between his teeth, puffing out sweet-smelling smoke which he inhaled lazily in slow, tired breaths. His brown eyes half closed and barely registering any words with more than one syllable which the one on the other end of the transponder snail seemed to like so much. "Ce la vie and all that, I suppose. Sawtooth Arlong is hardly an important factor in the grand scheme of all this, I suppose. We'll just have to try harder for next time. Right? Very well then, just keep the channel open and waaaghhhh." The snail's eyes bugged out before the stalks flopped into the mont's palm. Ew. A middle-aged man in a dull brown trenchcoat held his head in his hand while his elbow rested against the table of the bar he was in, fingers drumming tiredly against the wood. A knife buried deep enough into his back to poke a hole through the front of his shirt. The bandit who had belonged to grinning insanely. His victim looked at him bored as blood dripped down the sword and from his mouth. "I'd sincerely wish you'd stop," thud. His head hit the table. Blood pooling on it and spilling onto the floor. "Dad. You've been staring out at the sea for over an hour, you okay? Garara, do you think me too feeble to simply admire the ocean without it concerning my health?" I'm fine, son. Just an old man reminiscing. Among other things. Not the least of which was the hernia, sciatica, arthritis and bad eyesight that he felt every hour of the day. The only thing that was still working as well as it did 50 years ago was, ironically enough, his liver. Edward Newgate, known to the world at large as Whitebeard, continued his watch out towards the east. The gentle sea breeze flowed over him carrying more than the sting of salt. The end of this era is fast approaching. I wonder if I'll get to see the next one? Looking at the going merry, one would imagine that the shipwright knew nothing of either tradition or superstition. Why else, when fitting a figurehead, chosen what looks like a baboon what had tried to swallow a toad? It wasn't till you got closer that you realized the dummy wasn't made of wood. He was just leaning over the real figurehead fast enough to drop in with his tongue sticking out a good foot and wriggling like a polygraph hooked up monkey garp. Long story. "Luffy, for the last time, will you pull back? The fishmen are sick of saving you," the beleaguered navigator yelled once more, only to fall on still deaf ears. "Maybe he won't fall in again. He's actually gripping the wood this time," said Usopp from his workstation, tinkering away on whatever trinket or tool he had in mind to close the distance between him and monsters. Luffy had been like this ever since the red line had came into view over the horizon. The Straw Hat Armada, more or less, since several more pirates who they hadn't cared to name had decided to give up the Jolly Roger and help rebuild Nami's home islands back to their former glory, were making for Logue Town with arrow precision and full speed. The recent additions to the crew had been ordered by Nami, their de facto leader, to help speed up the ships so Luffy didn't die of anticipation. I won't even try to put Zoan what he's thinking, given that his thoughts were so rapid at the moment that it would have been like an arthritic being dictated to by the Micro Machines guy. They did, however, pertain to Logue Town, Gold Roger, One Piece, plenty of meat, and for some reason what he'd look like with a man chug. He'd been waiting almost his entire life for this. Everything he'd done so far had been building up to what he would soon be doing. This place where the Pirate King was born, lived and died, and was where his own legend would be born. Meanwhile, on one of the growing armada's other ships, the crew's two most intimidating members were locked in the blood-soaked, super-destructive mortal combat they called light sparring. Jin and Zoro stood across from each other, panting quite heavily, while Grunts looked on with a mix of fear, respect and greed as Barry exchanged hands, both breathing raggedly with both sweat and blood covering them to various degrees. "You're starting to drop," huffed Jin. "That shot to my leg should have toppled me." Zoro smiled, the arm holding his remaining practice bokken held steady at his opponent. "That would have been a lot less impressive if you'd had more power in your hits." Felt like a baby's rattle. The two demons wearing human skin just grinned maniacally at each other, neither willing to make the first move, because that would mean showing their opponent that the last attack did a lot more than they were bragging about. Back in the flagship, the small group of sailors on this expedition who were actually competent outside of a battlefield had given up on their captain were going over their plan for when they get to Logue Town. Usopp and Nami sat in front of a large crate with a map of the city on top of it. A dozen assorted pirates and fishmen surrounding them with only marginal discomfort between the two. "This is Logtown," said Nami, "the place widely known as where Gold Roger was born and executed." Usopp continued, "But even before that it was still the town of beginnings, because as the closest settlement to the Grand Line entrance, anyone going into that sea from the East Blue almost always has to stop here, almost all of those guys being pirates." Nami motioned to a place in the center of the map dotted with a large number of buildings she'd circled. Logtown is home to the largest marine base in this part of the world. It has more than 5 times the amount of troops than anywhere else does, and many times the resources in case they have to nip any would-be pirate kings in the bud. They motioned to several other points on the map. From the central base, here and here. She pointed to several well-spaced buildings, are the official town police and guard posts, while these posts. She pointed to the gallows, the dock, and a spot she'd marked as Gold Rogers, are areas that rookie pirates are known to visit before leaving for the Grand Line, like a rite of passage. Our safest bet is for only the Sunny Make port, while most of you head out into a remote spot to avoid detection. We go in, buy supplies and return without anyone being suspicious of the lamb-headed ship." One formerly grubby-looking sailor, formerly grubby meaning the kind of man who's tried to bathe but has won too many years out of practice to do so successfully, raised his arm. "Beggin' pardon, Ms. Nami. But would do ye mean most of us?" The two officers looked at each other. "Well, since you ask so nicely." Her smile turned coy, causing the men's own grins to turn stupid. "I need a few of you for a special assignment. Can you do that for me?" Stupid grins spread like wildfire among the men. "Suyuri, whatever ye want." Nami's seductive smile grew more so. "While we go shopping, I need you to watch out for our captain." "Pop, what?" She got up and leaned over just a little, showing just enough that it sent the formerly scurvy sea dogs back into salivating hornbags. "Please? We can't do any of the really important stuff if we have to watch him all day." Their stupid grins were enough for her. Caw. She heard a loud flap of wings before something hit the rail. Oh, it's just you." She sighed and fished around her pocket for a few belly coins. If it wasn't the only way for people to get today's paper in a world that was 80% ocean, then the sight of an albatross in a little hat with a sack full of papers and money around its neck would seem unusual. The creature shook its head at the offer of payment and gestured at its satchel, saying "for belly" where Nami knew it had said too. "If hitting you wouldn't curse us, you'd have been dead the day you got this job." The bird lowered his head and caught. Nami fished out 2 more coins and dropped them in the bag before drawing her paper. The albatross beating a hasty retreat. Chair. A scuffling of feet and a deck chair was underneath her before she reached age. "Now let's see wha." She opened the paper. A flyer fell out. Luffy. Logtown certainly didn't look any different from any other port town in the world, at least on first glance. It was busy, but so was any other town beside the seaside. People bustled up and down the busy streets. Merchants sold their wares of mostly fish. Bars made up more than half of the businesses so that no sailor ever had to go dry even on land. That being said, it was completely obvious right from the get-go that this town was anything but ordinary. I mean seriously. The marine presence in this town alone was, like, way higher than in any other area of any other blue. It was a rite of passage for newcomer pirates, as if this place where the greatest man who ever lived was born and died was a holy sight to them. Anyone who wanted to hoist the Jolly Roger with the big boys in the Grand Line almost had to fight, is almost required to come here as a matter of principle, which the Marines capitalized on and were able to make hundreds of arrests every year thanks to the criminals quite literally coming to them. Which is many reasons why it was a bad idea to come here. The straw has pulled up at the dock. Nami blinked several times in the vain hope that the thick lenses she was wearing would hurt her eyes less, but since the laws of physics seemed content to remain the way they are, the glasses stayed the same. Behind her were a group of likewise disguised individuals. The toothless had perfect smiles, the unwashed reeked of soap, hair had been straightened, cloths washed. They looked less like pirates and instead looked like almost perfectly normal people. They hated it. How did y'all get these so itchy? It took me forever to build up that stink. I can't hide a pistol in hair this straight. Would any of you rather walk around town screaming, "I'm a pirate"? Well, when ye put it like that. She nodded curtly. Now as for the rest of you. Her lip thinned at the sight before her. or rather the lack of a sight before her. Sanji. The man was only a few inches away from her, his eyes shaped like love hearts. Yes, my beloved angel? Where are Luffy and Zoro? Dunno. I was too busy finding you even more gorgeous with those glasses. I see. Breath. 3.2.1. Breath? Okay. Usopp. A wide frame waddled out from between the nicely dressed gentlemen. Bulky in all the wrong places and sporting a nose so crooked the tip was almost brushing his upper lip. Zoro jumped off the other side of the ship. Said he was going to replace those two cheap swords of his. And Luffy? Gangway. A blur shot over them, hitting the ground, running and vanishing in the crowd of the town in an instant. Luffy. Several hands covered her mouth at the same time before she knocked them away. That idiot. What was he thinking running into town wearing his normal clothes? Is he trying to get spotted again? Usopp patted her back with a pseudo-meaty palm. Relax, Nami. I made sure he took a disguise before he left. She snorted, like what? A curly fake mustache? Asterisk foo foo pphhhoo. Forget it. He grumbled and grabbed the thick, ugly mustache dangling over his mouth before tearing it from his face. Aggggghhhhh. Luffy edged around the weirdo, rolling around in agony with the profusely bleeding fulcrum, patting his fake beard down while he continued his search for the gallows. Okay, now let's see if I can find those gallows. The map Nami was working from had been reduced to an ink-stained mess that was barely eligible. The men scratched their heads in frustration from the rapid revision Nami had made to her plan. Team 1 will be headed by myself and head straight through town. Team 2, you're heading with Sanji round the island from the left. How about we let them group together and we make up Team 1 Nami Swan? Thak, Team 3 will be led by Usopp and will circle the town round from the right, and we all meet at the gallows. Why does everyone I now always end up saying that? Always, Team 3, led by Usopp and ending up at the gallows. One pirate muttered dejectedly. Ye know more than one person named Usopp? Another asked. Aye. And when I was a lad I wanted to be a mystery novelist. But nobody cares about that neither now do they? The first pirate grumbled. With any luck we'll have caught up to him before he reaches there and makes an ass of himself. The young Logia wandered the streets rather aimlessly. You'd think with them being such a historical landmark the gallows would be easy to find, but no. He'd passed countless bars, merchants selling Pirate King bobbleheads, which he bought, genuine Roger fake mustache, which he put atop his other fake facial hair, and a food cart selling Goal. Den delicious Jolly Roger fried fish cakes. He bought the whole cart. But no gallows. How is he supposed to make an ass of himself if he couldn't find the gallows? Little known fact, Luffy was not good at directions. Zoro never had a problem with getting lost. Well, okay, with you want to be technical, he couldn't find west with a compass. I meant he never really found his last of a sense of direction to be that big a deal. He always found what he was looking for eventually, and his hunt for Mihawk wasn't on any sort of schedule, so he was content just to drift about getting jobs to keep fed and hone his skills. The last thing he wanted was a chaperone, especially for this. Okay, so it should be around here somewhere. Where do you think you're heading, bitch? Tilting his head in the direction of the commotion, he spotted two taller than average guys. One a near skeleton who looked like his head was too heavy for his neck, and the other pair shaped with pigtails were harassing a young woman holding a cloth-covered package. The thin one pointed the tip of a blade as long as she was at her neck and sneered. I knew we'd find Yaen without that smokestack around. We've got a bone to pick with you. The fat one snorted. Yeah, it's cause of you that our boss is in jail. Your boss is in jail for piracy. I just happened to be the arresting officer. She answered back without a hint of fear. And if you two insist on fighting me, I guarantee you'll be joining him. The pear-shaped one cracked his knuckles. Is that right? Well, now that sounds like a challenge, don't it? He unsheathed his own massive blade and hefted it behind him. Yep, it does. The lanky one grinned and mirrored his friend's move. Without giving pause, they pulled their weapons back and swung them with all the grace of baseball bats. Our dreams were broken because of you. In an instant his hands were on Watto, and in another instant those freaks would be on the ground in horrible agony. It came as a surprise when that horrible agony was not caused by him. In the blink of an eye, the young woman had dropped the wrapping from her sword, got past the non-existent guard of the two pirates, slashed them both in one swing and spun just past them as they fell to the ground, unconscious from shock. Numbly he let go of his sword. He hadn't seen a woman with that kind of talent since. Whoa! She caught one foot with the other and fell flat on her face, totally ruining the epicness of her move. The crows, who had previously been scared and then amazed at her action, now started loudly guffawing at her, clapping like they would for a clown. Couldn't stick the landing, huh? She let go of her weapon and started groping the ground in front of her, her hair draping over her face to hide how red it was. Not being one to laugh at a lady, Zoro picked up her glasses and got her attention. Looking for these? He held them up. Huh? She looked up. Zoro's heart leapt into his throat. More than when Kuro clawed him, than when Mihawk humiliated him, nothing was quite as painful as what he was seeing now. Kuina? The curtain pulled back and she stepped out. How's this? Oh, how beautiful, madam. Yowza. Whoa, baby. The curtain closed again, only to open a split second later. And this? The pinnacle of elegance. Hubba hubba. Awoga. It closed and opened again as she stepped out. What about this? A miracle of taste. Humana humana humana. I'm making ridiculous noises to imply I find you attractive. She modeled outfit after outfit at a speed that any man dragged along on a shopping trip could only dream a woman could move at. The stack of potential clothing growing higher and higher. The clerk, who for some reason thought having hair shaped like a coat hanger would, because cheered for the young woman as the pile of outfits she'd tried on grew taller and taller. His eyes becoming more belly-like with each second passed. To the left and right of him, several gentlemen who he could not say for preservative reasons, maybe pirates, enjoyed the non-explicit show, finding themselves rather enjoying this more than what they should be doing. Only when the stack reached the ceiling, only when half the racks in the store were empty and the floor was moist with drool, did Nami step out from behind the curtain, wearing what she came in with. Done, she said curtly, and headed towards was upon her in an instant. Excellent, madam. You look magnificent in everything. I know. Now how will you be paying for this? Cash or cash? I don't want any of it. What? She stuck her tongue out for a second before pushing the front door open. That stuff is way too gaudy. I prefer something practical. Come on, guys. I saw a store down the street that looked good. Like loyal puppies they hurried along after her, but not before one spared a sympathetic glance at the poor shopkeeper. Small rivers of tears running down his face as he realized he not only put up with that for nothing, but every item in the store was stacked in a big pile in the middle of the room. But who gives a crap about him, right? Ippon Matsu was not a good businessman. His father had not been a good businessman. Neither had his grandfather. In fact, none of the men in his family for the past 200 years had been very good businessmen. Yet for that same amount of time they had been businessmen. For the simple reason that the kind of business they dealt with was one that was very close to them. Sadly, a passion does not always equate to a gift. The barging buckets over there. He sighed and jabbed a thumb at a couple barrels filled with old scabby-looking swords that were so blunt they were more bats than blades. 50,000 if it's still sharp, or 14,900 if it's blunt. Zoro really didn't have the patience or the savvy to argue with the man and nodded. It'll have to do, he said before reaching into his wallet, with a little sword-like button on it, and pulled out the money, brushing past Wado and drawing Ippon Matsu's now rapt attention to it. The mont's eyes bugged to the size of balloons for a second before shoving them back into his skull. That guard, the pattern on the hilt, he'd have to be as stupid as he looked not to recognize as such a famous sword. Excuse me, son, he said slowly and carefully so not to squeal like a little girl. But might I see that sword at your waist? The swordsman looked back down at his one remaining blade. Sure, just be careful I don't have the money to replace it. Very few people have the money to replace one of these. He chuckled inwardly as his cheeks pulled back against his will to form a dopey grin. This sword, he said in an absolutely ecstatic voice. This sword is complete and total crap. Zoro smacked him one upside the head like a bitch. Then why are you grinning like an idiot? That literally wiped the stupid smile of his face. Never been so glad to be assaulted. Sorry, allergies sniff. He didn't miss a beat. But seriously, this sword is absolute garbage. The guard's worn. The sheath feels brittle. and I beat one whack against a rock would shatter the blade into tiny pieces. He unsheathed the blade, tutting at the flawless shine and perfect edge. Such a waste of steel. Hey, that sword was gift and the most prized possession of my master's family, Zoro defended. And you use it for combat. Please, do you know how old some family blades are? That this thing hasn't disintegrated is nothing short of a miracle. Huffing, he put it down and stippled his fingers. Tell you what, because I like the look of it, purely for ornamental purposes, of course I'm willing to buy it off you. Say 200,000? I'll even let you take those swords you wanted on the house. Zoro stopped for a moment, seeming to genuinely consider it. He opened his mouth to speak when ding, they turned. He balked. The same girl from before came stumbling in. Right into the sword barrel, causing the swords to spill out onto the floor, one even shatter from light impact. Sorry. Grown, how is a klutz like you even a swordsman? He rubbed his temples. He dipped behind the counter and pulled out a wheatstone and a bottle of polish. If you're going to wear such a magnificent on small fries, then you should just hang it up for good. The girl bowed her head repeatedly, sorry I wa. Startling even the unshakable Zoro. For a moment the Kuina look-alike all but apparated in between Zoro and the Ippon Matsu, her bad eyes fixed entirely on the sword he was clutching like a vice. I can't believe it, I never thought I'd see one of these so soon. Don't say it, so swear to me I will destroy you if you say. This is Wado Ichimonji, right? Vendetta. Why yes. I'm afraid it does go by that name. But as of it's just a ceremony-style blade. He chuckled, not really built for fighting. You're much better off with another. Another? The bespectacled young woman asked, confused. Tearing her eyes away from the edge just long enough to whip out a thick book from the back of her. Thankfully, thought Zoro, loose jeans. Are you kidding? This is one of the 21 great swords? It's famous for its strength? Dammit woman. His fist came down on the table hard enough to really hurt his hands. I almost had it. I almost had the great Wado. And you just had to open your big mouth. Almost had it? The grass-haired one thought morosely. Get out. Ge tout ge tout ge tout ge tout. But I haven't got my mistake. That'll be 2,000 berry for the wheatstone and 1,100 for the polish. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a bill. I only have a 5,000 berry note. Not a problem. Ippon opened the register and pulled out some coins. And here's your change. Thank you for your patronage. Thank you. Now get clatter. After you clear up that display you just ruined. Turning away from the girl and back to Zoro, he looked ready to continue his tirade for an instant. But as he drew in breath his entire form drooped forward, his eyes suddenly very tired and his posture slack. Say what you will about anger not being good for you. Ippon Matsu was the sort of man that needed a good scream every once in a while. Look. The man said in a bored tone. The girl's right. This blade's an absolute masterpiece. I tried to buy this for what it's really worth and it will likely be the only thing I have left, even if you were willing to part with it. I'm not. Zoro stated bluntly. The man nodded and sighed. Just grab a sword or two from the bin and get out. When the young man complied, Ippon slumped on the table. Head in his hands and eyes firmly on Wado. So close, he was so close. I mean, what are the odds Roronoa Zoro would just walk into his shop? Maybe if he was lucky Mihawk would wander in. Hey, this one looks good, you sure this is the right bin? He tore his eyes away from the thing dangling from the young mont's waist, hey yo, to see what piece of crap he'd fished out. From a guard shaped like a rounded cross a curved razor of darkness sprung forth. Its edge capturing even the smallest fractal of light as if to devour it. Evil black flames etched into it and seeming to flow as though alive with even the smallest movement of the now doomed boy's hand. Absolutely. Come on. I don't. Come on. It's not going to kill ya. Shouldn't we be looking for, quit being a and do it? Right. Gulp 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 gulp. P. The force of the belch blew the young man backward, his chair already pierced onto legs tilted backwards as he collapsed to the floor. The entire room was still for a moment. Nobody spoke. A hand shakily rose up over the tangle. A pint glass clenched in it. In a slow and unsteady fashion he turned the glass over and sat it on the table. Nobody moved. Quadruple AE. The room exploded into frenzied cheering. A young pirate's first drink. This calls for a party. Usopp pulled himself back into a sitting position at the table. His men either laughing at him or slapping him in the back in congratulations. Damn boss. You're a right little boozer, ain't ya? A squat-faced man with a scruffy beard slapped his back a little too harshly. You a erp. His vision was already swimming in front of him as a pleasant tingle spread across him from his stomach. Did the L woos that? He slurred. Fells like IDRK-20. Nor yet wider pirate gave a deep belly laugh. Yeah, I remember my first drink. Yeah, it barely touched your lips and you went down like a mighty oak. The men just laughed at the sight of his reddening face. Usopp just giggled and reached for another drink. So, this is what my dad does for fun, eh? Another member of his crew. An older gentleman who looked like he'd made a long career out of being a professional nobody rubbed his beard. Well, from what I hear, her father is a member of Red Hair's crew. And their parties are a legend second only to their power. Though if you're his son, when he can't be that much less of a lightweight. There was another round of laughter at the young Pinocchio's expense. The boy did not rise to it, however, and just continued looking into his mug. They'd started out trying to find Luffy, and they'd headed straight for the gallows, a few of the older and sneakier ones among them not for the first time. However, on his march Usopp had found himself pulled backwards by the collar and towards a busy-looking tourist grown causingly named the Jolly Roger. They'd plucked him down on a stool and ordered a round of drinks for each of them. The bartender, a man who had been professionally down up to look like the sort of slimeball you'd expect in a den for cutthroats and murderers, didn't even ask for ID when he poured the 17-year-old the paint thinner he just chugged. He'd brought up the problem of being spotted as a gang of pirates, disguise or no disguise. One member of the crew, a somewhat scruffy man in his 30s by the name of Old John, son of young John, calmly reached into his jacket, took out his flintlock, cocked it in full view of everyone, turned over his left shoulder to a pretty young woman and pulled her roughly towards him. Gives a kiss off or a put a bullet tween your pretty eyes. The blonde beauty stared at the man for a moment, before giggling and giving him a peck on the beer-stained cheek. He cheered, triple AA. The rest of the tavern cheered with him. That's the beauty of Log Town. Roger's legend had turned this place into a pirate-themed tourist trap. The nearness to the reverse mountain was only the secondary reason it was so heavily policed. With every stall selling discount eye patches, and every visitor trying to roll their R's, it was near impossible trying to see who was a tourist pretending to be a pirate, was a pretending to be a tourist, and who was a pirate pretending to be a tourist pretending to be a pirate. All they had to do was put on a limp and say, AAAARRRR, every few minutes. Usopp sat his throbbing head on the countertop, his blurred vision mostly focused on the pint tumbler. Ya know. Maybe I'm not cut out for all the piratey stuff. The young grizzled man next to him gasped. You, the great Captain Usopp, unfit to be a pirate? No, I'm. He paused for about 10 seconds before a tap on the shoulder kick started him again. Pirate material, Captain material. I just don't think I need to do all the stuff like this, he said before quaffing the glass, which of course meant his overalls drank more than he did. The men exchanged a look of utter confusion. Be a pirate and not drink? The concept was as bizarre as 1 + 1 = Thursday. I look like some gangly kid. I sound like some gangly kid. I'm pretty sure I shouldn't be this drunk right now. What good is a dashing adventurer when he looks like he'll blow over in a strong breeze? Now that they understood, lad. No, every pirate needs a peg leg and a eye patch to be called a pirate. No hick, but who'd respect a lightweight captain who any of his men can drink under the table, he murmured to the bottom of his glass. The rare few are born with an iron liver cap'n, the rest of us had to learn to be drunkards. The larger pirate slapped his back. Trust us. Someday the mere sight of yaw will make grown men shake in their boots. You sure? As sure as me beard is itchy. Now enough mopping. Drink up. Echoed loudly from the bar and down the street as the party got into full or paste your text here.